Hello, everyone. I am Orbital. First name Daniel, last name Lee, and the username is Orbital. I am a freelance broadcaster, caster, host, analyst in esports. Been doing this for a while, and I'm happy to be here. The way that I am working my way in is I was a part of the Canadian Intercollegiate Exhibition, I believe, for 2 years. You might have seen me, I think, back in I want to say the beginning of 2023 when one of them ran by, and then in 2024 as well. I've been doing quite a bit as well, but that's a little bit later. I'm very happy to be here and be able to just kind of talk a little bit about my own casting ideals, my own casting thoughts as well, and to kind of be able to, I want to say, welcome those interested in casting because to me, there's a lot more in esports than just trying to play. There's a wide variety of jobs, of roles, of passions, of hobbies, of projects that people are always interested in, and yet they just sometimes not many people know about it. So I'm here to talk a little bit about casting and what it is, and kind of do an introduction, as you can see from the slideshow. If you want to put a name to the face, no, you don't. There's a reason I'm on casting, and I pray I only have about 5 minutes of airtime. Taking a look at things though, to start off, a little bit about me is I've been casting, like I said, since 2015. At the very top is my first ever job that I had, which was actually at a LAN. Essentially, I got knocked out of a tournament in 2 rounds. Basically, it was under 3 hours of gameplay, and I had nothing else to do, so I sat down and started casting, and that's how I started at least. Since then, I have not only started with League of Legends, but I branched out to 30 different titles: Rocket League, CS:GO, Valorant, chess, volleyball, Apex Legends, Fortnite, PUBG. Essentially, if it was a video game, I cast it. And I will get into that a little bit later, which is talking a little bit about, advanced things about casting itself. I work with groups such as UEA, Unified Esports Association. I work with CECC, NECC, ESU. These are all primarily US based, I want to say collegiate groups, but I've also done private gigs known as whitelisted events, such as private tournaments for companies that want to host like intercompany events and such like that. I've done both online and offline events. So I've done quite a few LANs, but I also do a lot of my work is online. So literally just in my home casting. And I've worked pretty much everywhere from the AM scene. I haven't gone all the way up to pro scene, but I've done the amateur scene to collegiate to high school to middle school and everywhere in between. One of the fun things is I'm currently working with a church building up their own esports division as well. So that's kind of the fun part. To kind of showcase what we will be talking about, though, is these are just kind of some of the things. We'll start out with what is casting. Again, I do apologize. I don't know what everyone's level of casting experience is here. So I am under the assumption that a lot of you have either dabbled a little bit in casting, either as a hobby or you stepped in to fill in and thought it was kind of cool, or you know about it, you really enjoy it, but you want to learn more and possibly drive yourself to a level where you are happy, comfortable, or if you're aiming to make this a job as well, get those skills down as soon as possible. Starting out, we'll be talking about what is casting, as well as what I assume are the foundations of casting, breaking down what a broadcast is, common mistakes of casting, and then, of course, some tips and tricks, some of the things that I've learned on and off the air that may or may not help you. I will also like to say, I know there's a Q&A session at the end, but I always feel my brain doesn't work that well to hold on to questions for, say, like 30 minutes. I barely last 5 minutes, quite honestly. There's a reason I'm a play-by-play. So I also want to offer the opportunity, if you have any questions throughout this, feel free to type them in general chat, ping me, and that way I can kind of see it up there. And I'll try and answer them as we go along. But I always feel it's very important to hit a lot of these points very quickly and when they come up, because it helps in the teaching aspect, being able to catch something that maybe you don't know or want to learn more about and being able to talk about it right then and there. With that, I also have a little bit of a disclaimer. much of casting and everything that I do and any of you might want to do is based around personal interest. What you like, what you don't like, and what you hate and what you love. Anything regarding this world is under an entertainment ideal. Essentially, we're actors and actresses on camera, and that's what we get hired out to do. With that in mind, you cannot take anything I say at face value. You are going to have different experiences than I do. You might be working in different games, you might be working with different people. Your own unique identity as a caster might be different as well. With that in mind, everything I say, take it with a grain of salt, dive deeper if you're interested, and don't sit there and say, oh, what he says is true. The main goal of this is to provide insight, but to also drive you to learn more, whether that be reaching out to other people, reaching out to other casters, reaching out to your own fellow classmates or anyone in here that's also interested in learning together. There are some things that I will say to me are very much like non-negotiables and stuff like that. That does not mean it isn't negotiable for you, if that makes sense. So once again, do not take anything I say at face value. These are based on my own interests as well as my understanding of casting. So far, so good. If anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute, talk, anything like that. I'm sure zLion's yelling at me in the background somewhere.
I'm literally eating some freaking hummus, bro. I'm enjoying the conversation. Oh,
All
and
right.
by the way, everybody, once again, this is recorded, so it's going to be posted later on YouTube.
Can you talk one more time?
Can you hear me?
Okay, good. I got scared that I wasn't recording. You scared me. All right. With that disclaimer out of the way, what is casting? By definition, and this is very broad as well, not just esports casting. If you go by the definition, it is the act of providing commentary over an event, sport, or match to help educate and entertain the audience. This is actually very important. At the end of the day, we are an entertainment business. No matter what you say on air, no matter what you think about your job is on air, it is important to know that you are there to entertain. And that comes in many ways, whether it be entertaining the audience or also entertaining yourself. If it is not fun for you, it's not going to be enjoyable to the audience either. That is something that I always like to talk about, but that is the general gist. We are there to provide entertainment and to educate the audience. Both of those can be two halves, maybe a slice of education, depending on, the game or the title or anything like that. Or it could be only a slice of entertainment and be all about education. Casting in general is about providing that commentary in a way to an audience. That being said, of course, there are separate roles that usually go into this. On the casting side, there are two roles, usually pretty distinct, known as a play-by-play caster and a color caster. Play-by-play is the one that generally is the very hype man. You always hear him, like any top tier video, all the big hype moments generally has a play-by-play's voice over it. League of Legends, frag videos in CSGO, Valorant hype moments. It's generally the play-by-play's voicing over that. They're the ones that bring the oomph. They're the ones that talk about the present a lot of the time. A color caster, not exactly a back seat, but takes just about everything else in a broadcast. They're the ones bringing the analytics to the desk while the game's going on, talking about why a situation occurred or trying to predict what's going to happen while still being very entertaining on the desk of a live match. The reason I say that, though, of a live match is because there are also desk roles. I'm sure you know about this one. There's a host, there's an analyst, and then there's some as well, normally like guest roles, but these are the two that are mainly known. Host is generally the one leading a desk segment, normally the one fielding the questions, moving things along, bringing up topics that maybe the analysts want to talk over. And the analysts essentially do, I want to say, a twice deeper dive than the color caster. An analyst role on the desk is to break down the very minute factors that the audience may have missed. Of course, that's for another time. Right now, we are talking about casting. I still want to talk about the fact that overall, we as casters are just part of a larger production. And that's going to be coming up as well, talking about a broadcast. There are so many other jobs as well. There's producers, there's observers, there's technical directors, there's tournament organizers even. that go into how a production goes on or how a broadcast goes on, and no one is more important than the other. I say that there are some people that will disagree with that for sure, but to me, every role is as important. It might vary from game to game, but every role has its part, and as a caster, you need to understand that there are going to be times where you feel like you are at the top of the world, you are the reason that this is going on. You're not. You are there, you are 90% face of the broadcast, sure, but there are so many other moving parts, and to be a good caster, you need to be able to respect all parts of the production. That being said, let's dive into what are the foundations of casting. There are going to be 4 different points that I bring up, 2 of which are here. First one being the flow of the game. When it comes to casting, how do you cast? What is the goal of casting? And for me, when I cast, it's all about reading the flow of a match. This can come in many forms. Generally, by game, I will be talking from a League of Legends perspective, but this also works for Valorant, for Apex Legends, for CSGO, for Rocket League, even FGC games, Super Smash Bros., Tekken 6, and all other titles. Every game, as casters, we are there to try and read the flow and follow the flow of the match. What we say either builds up anticipation or can take away anticipation from a match. So to be able to do that, we have to figure out the beginning, middle, and end, or how I like to break it down is 5 separate parts. Much like a tidal wave that comes in through the waters, there's different moments before the impact actually hits. There's the calm, which is when everything's pretty still. If you ever take a look at water, it feels calm. It feels like nothing's really moving. And that's when our tone goes low. It's they're farming or they're wandering around, they're setting up their default. Nothing crazy. The build-up is where we see the anticipation of action. In League of Legends, this normally is parallel to the likes of people setting up for a team fight around Dragon or around Baron, or we see a gank coming in. In Valorant, it's normally, hey, we're pushing into a site, or we're getting ready to push into a site, or you see utility being dropped in front. For Rocket League, it's a breakaway. You see a great save, and now you're getting ready to round the corner, ready for your own aggression. As a caster, you can see that. That's the buildup. It is not the impact of an event. It is the anticipation or prediction of something to come. The crest, this is right before the big bang of sorts, is when those predictions start to become a reality. The reason that this is not the same as the crash is the crest is right before. It's when we start translating what we think is happening into reality. It's the transfer there. For League, this would be, we predicted that they are setting up for a Baron team fight, and now everyone is collecting. We are seeing all 10 members start to run in. We're starting to see all these players start to make their way and really see each other in game itself. For Valorant, this is where we're actually getting first entry into sight. This is where, your duelists may be diving in, or the initiators might be popping off, or anything of that sort. It is the beginning of the action to the game. For Apex Legends, this might seem a little bit different, or Fortnite, or even the likes of PUBG. These usually can occur with regards to teams actively meeting on a POI. They're actively, dropping in, or, third partying or fourth partying into a site, or the zone's closing in. You kind of get the idea. Those are considered the crest. That's where you see that transfer of information, all the prediction moving in to the match. It builds up that anticipation even more to get to the crash. The crash is where everything pops off. That's where you hear the play-by-play screaming, screeching, oh my gosh, multiple kills, everyone's dead, ace, team wipe, anything like that, a flawless, or anything of the nature. It's where everything just feels like it is a cacophony of craziness. It's where everyone gets hype and it's where the story has that massive impact. It's where everything that we've led up to at that point can hit. And it just all kind of topples down. It's a very large rush of energy, and that's what we want to bring to the table. It is the large, it's one of the higher energy events to occur within a game. That is what that crash is. After that, it's a settle. It's when everything goes back down. Once all that energy is out, we go back down to kind of that neutral level. It's also where you usually see like a post-game breakdown. You hear, the colorcaster will generally, hey, that was a really cool fight, but did you notice this? And this is why this went so well, or this went to expectations, or that didn't go to expectations. The settle is bringing everyone's energy back down to a level where we can start getting ready for the next, because it's a rinse and repeat cycle. If you kind of notice when I'm talking about flow, this is not talking about the overall series. I'm actually just talking about a small portion of a game, because the flow is the constant rinse and repeat cycle. Just like in League, just like in Valorant, these happen continuously throughout the match. And for casters, it's our job to be able to read that flow, write it, and be able to show off the entire flow to the audience each time. Because we are, as casters, supposed to have such a very good handle on how a game plays out, how a game is actively going. And to be able to bring that to an audience is a core position of our job. And you might have also noticed that, again, as I talk, I'm mentioning League, I'm mentioning CSGO, I'm mentioning Valorant, I'm mentioning, Fortnite and all that. Every title has a different flow. For League, this is one of the most basic structures. You see this all the time. The build up to an event, the crash, and then the settle. It is by far the easiest to read because of the pacing of League of Legends. If you take an FPS, sometimes you don't get this easy level of build up. You don't always get the chance to prep appropriately. For FGC, it's even worse. With how quickly the impact moments can happen or the crash moments can happen, you have to be ready to run through, the calm, the build up, the crest. You have to be able to do that on a dime. Of course, that comes with experience as well. Learning what the hype moments are and learning when those cresting moments are, so you can bring out the most energy and be able to show that to the audience. That's kind of what the flow is when it comes to in-game and how we present it to an audience. That's foundation number one. Foundation number two is being able to tell a narrative or a story. And what we mean by narrative or story is the overarching theme of an actual event, tournament, match, or anything of the sort. For instance, if we're looking at, I want to say, one of my favorites was in Dota 2. If anyone knows Dota 2, I love you for it. If you don't, I'm so sorry. This might seem crazy. In Dota 2, there is something called the International. Biggest tournament available. It's huge. This thing has wild amounts of teams coming in, and there are things called Cinderella stories. And in those moments, you get to talk about the narrative of some of the matches that you cast. When we look at a series, we have to look at all the moving parts, including the players. And that's what's going to form your narrative, how we present this series as a whole. For instance, is it a David versus Goliath? Is this the undefeated team in this league going up against the 0-5? Is that going to be our narrative? Is this a David and Goliath? Is this a battle of the first place spots? Is this a battle for the crown? That would be another narrative or story. That's what we're talking about when crafting these kind of overarching themes. It can even go down as far as talking about specific players. For me, in League of Legends, it's a story of Faker right now. That can be a narrative in its own. Will Faker be able to earn his 5th crown? Will he be able to overcome the hurdles of playing in the lower bracket? Or, for more recently, FlyQuest. If I were casting that match, it'd be the hope of NA trying to make their way out of Worlds. that is the narrative that we want to be able to craft with information known as the pregame analytics and pregame information. This can come from multiple sources, including very heavy, data analysis. If we're talking about a certain team, you want to draw up their past histories, and you want to draw into, maybe their match records or the players that are on their team. For instance, if you're looking at the information provided for a team, are they a roster of rookies? Are these all first-year players? Are these all fresh players to the competitive scene? Or are these a team of veterans? That might push a different narrative as well. As casters, we need to be able to digest this information pre-game or pre-series and be able to talk about that on broadcast as well. Now, is that narrative going to stay the same? Most likely not. Because as much as we craft a narrative to the start of a series, the in-game can also draw a completely different story. This is normally, to me, it's like the reverse sweeps of a series, where you sit there and go, oh man, that did not go to our expectations. One team is doing way better. Even though we said this is a David versus Goliath, this undefeated champion, well, they're getting knocked down a peg. We as casters have to highlight that. We want to bring to the audience the most realistic and clean understanding of what's happening in the game, not just from an analytics point of view, but always, not just an analytics point of view, but also just information in general. We're talking about the players, these histories, these actual people that are playing the game in front of you. We want to bring that narrative, even if it's changing. One of my favorites is seeing a player that has gone terribly, a washed player, some people might say, to coming out with an all-star performance. That is changing the narrative or shifting the narrative in the middle of a series. Talking about maybe our predictions were not right, but we need to acknowledge that, and that is something that we talk to the audience about. From there, we also want to build upon the narrative. Once the series is over, we want to be able to leave the audience with more to think about for the future of the broadcast or future of more matches later on. You can talk about, will we see these teams again? How are they going to perform against future opponents? We prep the stage and we build upon the narrative that we set throughout the beginning and the middle of the match to further reinforce what we hope to talk about later. This narrative about a player, about a team, about a tournament, about a match, anything like that, we want to be able to, as casters, bring this to life and then do that for an entire match. And we can do this over multiple series. This is per, 3-game series, 5-game series, anything like that. These narratives transcend beyond just a singular match. Especially in Cinderella stories, this will happen from, their first match all the way up to if they make it to the grand finals. A narrative can go on for so long. A narrative can even transcend years. We've, you talk about dynasties a lot of the time. That's a narrative that can outlast an entire year or further. So as casters, we need to have that information and be able to present it in a way that doesn't maybe sound as wordy as I'm talking about now, but to be able to make it to a level of we know what we're talking about and we're excited for it as well. Once again, narrative is never static. It is never going to be the same each time. It can always change, and we have to be ready for that. Number 2, a lot more. Providing information and insight goes hand in hand with the narrative building. But to dive a little bit deeper into it, there are different ways to gather information. If you heard me talk a little bit before, it was the players and then the game itself that we want to bring data into. This is normally seen, I think the best difference of collecting information is between static and dynamic. Static, what I like to call static at least, is game data that will almost never change. For instance, how much a gun will do in damage output, how much an arm shot will do. These are numbers that will almost never change in the match itself. There might be a patch, sure, but that's still static data. That is information that will not change no matter how hard we try and manipulate it at that point in time. This is also comes down to like car speeds in Rocket League, or how much a punch will do in Super Smash Brothers. Or, loot times in, say, Apex. All of this information is just raw game data that we can always draw on. We'll always be able to sit down and be like, hey, this gun does this much damage. It's going to be the meta right now. I think the one that I can think of recently was the Mozambiques, the Akimbo Mozambiques in Apex Legends, has ruled the competitive scene for a very long time, and they needed to nerf it. That would be a static piece of information thanks to game data. Same with characters, same with champions and heroes and everything like that. These are all things that will not change as easily. Dynamic information is a little bit different. These are talking about, the players themselves is usually what I like to say, or the standings of an event, or maybe even like strength of schedule for a team. When we talk about dynamic, it's things that can change on a pretty regular basis. When we talk about players can have hot and cold streaks. That's something that we can talk about because we have to be dynamic. We cannot sit there and say a player will always play perfectly or a player will always play poorly. We can insinuate that they play good or bad, but as with the information, they can sometimes change up. They can have a really good game. That can be different. They can have a really bad game. A good player can have a bad game. That would be dynamic. And providing insight into all of that and being able to talk about it appropriately is what we want to do as casters. That's where the third line comes in, which is exporting the information. We are the funnels of all of this information in front of you. All of this, we're staring at a game, just so much happening on screen, and we have to take it all in, filter it in our minds, get all of the information appropriate, and be able to relay it back out to an audience of maybe 10, maybe 20, maybe 1,000 people if you ever get to that point. That's the third point. Fourth one, this one might seem like a misnomer, but as a caster, you want to have a conversation. You want to enjoy the game that you're casting, and you want to work with your casting partner. As we talked about on most casting desks, there are two people. There's the play-by-play and the color caster. You are hard locked with that person for the next hour to 3 hours. You better be ready to enjoy the time with them, and you have to act like it as well. Once again, we're actors on this stage. There is a very big difference on a broadcast between two people that are individuals talking about separate topics and a pairing of two friends more than willing to chat, really get into it, actively listening to each other and playing off of each other as well, listening to what your co-caster is talking about and being able to riff off of that, if you will. One of the things is, again, even though you are working together, you have to make it seem like you are buddies. I'm sure a lot of people have felt this. There are some games where you sit there and it's like, man, this casting group just doesn't, this duo just isn't working as well. Even if you might not feel it, if you are the caster, or you're the audience, I should say. If you're the audience, there are times where you can almost hear the casters, and you might not know why, but you know it's off. It feels uncomfortable listening to them. And with that in mind, I am, this is something that also a lot of people will actually challenge me on if you go talk to, I think, others, but you have to actively enjoy and talk with them and have a conversation. You're not teaching a college course. You're not sitting there trying to monologue like I am. You're not trying to sit there and just teach a course, a 501 college course. That's not what you're there for. You're there to really just amp up. You're there to make this entertaining as possible. And to do that, the best way I've found is to talk like your friends. If you were to sit down and just watch a game together and you just talk with your friend, that's the kind of energy that you want to bring to a broadcast. Yes, you want it to be somewhat formal. You want to have kind of that energy behind it, especially if it's a high priority match, but you still want to have that fluid talking stage. There's a difference between halting speech and having to carefully select your words and feeling comfortable enough to just roll with the speech pattern where you can just keep talking and keep talking. It feels like it's not a chore, but just it comes so easily from you. That's the kind of energy, and it's most commonly found when you are talking with friends, when you are talking with people that you are comfortable around. I will say this with a little bit of an asterisk. This is actually quite difficult to do if you do not have a regular duo. Down below, as you can tell, like League of Legends wise, if you play League, you know Captain Flowers, you know Azale, you know Vidius, you know them. I believe in Apex, if you play Glitter Explosion and Vicky Kitty, these two are really popular in there as well. And then in Valorant, I'm sure you've heard of Evil Cat. These are all casters that have such great energy with their co-casters. They bring such insight into a broadcast, and they can read the flow of a match. They know how to match what they're talking about to the flow of a series as well. That's it for the foundations. Does anyone have any questions so far? Crickets chirping in the background. I like it. All right, moving on to the next. What is a series? We talked so much about the foundations of casting. What the heck is a broadcast? Because there's a lot that goes on. Essentially, in a broadcast, there are, I want to say, about 3 to 4 separate sections. And this can come down to pregame, in-game, and postgame. When I talk about pregame, I'm talking about things that do not happen during the broadcast itself. These are done even further before a match starts and can even happen days before. This is where you start going over the match that you're going to be casting, and you go and learn all the information that we just talked about. Learn about the players, learn about the game, build up a story that you want to talk about. You know, hey, this player is actually on a really hot streak. We're seeing, drop 20 kills every single game. Are they going to do it again? Because they've done it every single time. Building a story with your co-caster on the match. This is all generally done pre-game. This is done before the show gets started. Getting comfortable with your co-caster is very important as well. 9 times out of 10, there's a chance, in the what we like to call the T3, T4 scene, you are actively going to be matched with people different almost every single time. You will, unless you are requesting it, you will not get the same duo every single time. So you need to learn how to get comfortable with your co-caster before a matchup. You need to know how they talk, know what they like to talk about, and that way you can match pace with them. Again, this is a friend's conversation. You're not teaching 2 separate courses. We're not trying to get a degree in League of Legends here. So getting comfortable with your crew, with your duo is very, very important. In pregame as well, outside of building the story, a series start or a broadcast start will also involve the production side, the producer, the observer, the TOs, or anyone like that. You are usually double checking with your production crew. This also usually involves the 30-minute call time that a lot of broadcasts will have, which is everyone in production shows up 30 minutes. You run through, your audio. You're doing, audio visual checks, making sure cameras work, making sure teams are ready for the game, which is a wild statement, by the way. That will happen more times than not, where a team is not ready at game time and producers yell and scream. So in pregame for a series, most likely you're doing one of these things at all points. Building on the data that you have, building on the story, getting comfortable in your own, in your own studio, or if you're at a LAN, getting comfortable in the environment that you're going to be casting at, and then getting used to the duo in production. In-game is when you're live. I always like to say, for casters, 90% of your job is going to be on air and 10% is off air, which will always I would say always kind of stay pretty handy there. 90% of the time, your job is to be on air, look good, look happy, look like you're enjoying the game, and look like you know what you're doing. It sounds silly, but it provides a world of difference. You have to actively think that the camera is always on you. And during this time, you are providing the information that you built up in the pregame. You're providing all the data brought together, talking about maybe meta stances or meta changes after a patch. You're shedding light on certain players that you want to highlight. You know, these players that have definitely put in blood, sweat, and tears and hours of their year into playing this game. You'll also be covering the gameplay. That's what the in-game, the live part of a broadcast is. And then, riffing with your co-caster and just enjoy the game in general. This is what you're doing for a majority share of your time. That's what we like to call the in-game. Post-game is a review of the game as soon as the series is done, or not even that. After a single map or game is done, you want to be able to review the game in the post-game breakdown. During this, you highlight maybe key moments in the game that you thought were very impactful, that had a match-turning effect. Being able to highlight those and also maybe some respectful plays, or inversely, you also might want to highlight poor performances. This might sound counterintuitive, but it is important to highlight the good and the bad, considering how a match should go. Highlighting the good is great, but as a caster, it is our job to highlight everything. So if someone had a bad time, someone didn't play well, someone made a lot of mistakes, it's good to highlight those factors, because moving into the next game, we want to set up and build for the next game. Generally, this is like a best of 3 matchup. So for something like for like a fighting game, one of my favorite analysis is, hey, one guy got stomped, 4 stocks, 0 on the other side. What does he need to do? Probably needs to play a little bit smarter. Doesn't want to get too crazy, needs to stop going so aggressive. So with that statement about one of the players, I have now set the expectation that next game, said players should play more conservatively. At least that's my opinion, right? That's what we mean by bridge into the next game. We set certain expectations and what we want to look for that were changes in the previous game. Of course, that doesn't always have to be something has to change. A bridge can easily be, we want to see more of that. If someone played exceptionally well, if player A in the FGC game completely stomped by denying all recovery or denying the get-ups, we want to see more of that. We have just set the expectation for the next game that this should happen again. So the audience tuning in now says, okay, I now know to look at, will this happen again? Will this player dominate again? And will the other player be able to recover or change in the way that has been set up? These are the ways that we bridge into a next game and how we set up the what to look for scenarios. And that way we can try and keep an audience entertained and watching throughout the entirety of the match. Sometimes, though, there are going to be interviews at the end of a series. I toss this in here because I realize that normally this would be like a host role. But there are some times where casters, you will have to provide interviews, and it can get very uncomfortable talking to players, because it's a vastly different aspect than actively talking to a co-caster, someone that has been wanting to be on a stage point or wanting to be on a desk like this. With that in mind, there are a few little points that I like to talk about interviews. Normally, if it's just you and the interviewee, as the interviewer, you are not the highlight of the match, or you're not the highlight of the interview. You are not there to espouse your knowledge of what just broke down. You are not there to show off your understanding of the game, and you are not there to belittle the interviewee. Because sometimes you might be interviewing someone that didn't win the match or played a little bit poorly. We want to put the spotlight on the player, on the interviewee that is there, to give them a chance to shine. Interviews are, I would say, one of the primary ways outside of gameplay that players get a chance to showcase their own personalities, and we are the facilitators for that. So always keeping in mind that the highlight of an interview is not the interviewer, but the interviewee, helps set up for the rest. The second point, questions should be short and sweet. One of my, this can be a little bit difficult because some interviewees or some players are not exactly prepped to be on an interview desk. But as an interviewer, your questions should be shorter than the answers the interviewee gives. We should be able to condense our thoughts down to being as open-ended as possible. And so the player can highlight themselves. We can say, and what did you feel about this certain matchup? We saw you play this character and then you saw these other characters come out. Well, and the player can go on. We want to try and keep it short because the interview should be primarily about them. I also feel that there should be a flow of questions when asking an interviewee. When I say flow of questions, it should almost start from the beginning of the series. Any questions that you have pertaining should follow the route of the series as well. So if I ask 3 questions, it might be about how did the player feel before the series started, such as were they excited going into the match? My second question would highlight maybe a match or a moment in the middle of the series. And then my third question would be about the future. Talking about, hey, you just won this series. What do you have to look forward to? Is there a team you're looking forward to playing on down the road? If you can kind of see that, the flow of questions, each one links together. And the reason for this is I feel the audience can feel the shift in energy. They can feel this this kind of a difference. It's just it's that feeling of it's all rolling in the same direction without choppiness. So if I were to jump all the way to the end, how'd you feel about game 3? I know you guys were just winning it. And then you all of a sudden hop back to like game 1 where it was dead even or something, that it doesn't really have the same energy to it because you're jumping around where the match was. So try and have a flow of questions in there. Finally, when you ask questions, try and make the interviewee think. Asking a standard yes or no question can be difficult. There's always a danger of that. So try to make the interviewee think, and that way they give open-ended answers. But yeah, so that's about casting in general. Of course, there are things you should do, and there are some things you shouldn't do. So let's talk about some of the common mistakes that you might have occur when casting. The most common mistake that I see occur while casting is monologuing. For the record, if you are an analyst or you're a color caster and this is around, the beginning or the end of a game and you are talking about you're deep diving into a match, monologuing is somewhat okay. The reason for that is you are breaking down something that goes on. However, monologuing during a live match can feel very overwhelming. This is essentially when someone is going on and on and on and on, even when action is happening in the game itself, as they're kind of going over a single point. One of the big things is, again, information overload, and you're trying to just fill time. These two things, as a caster, especially new casters, you are trying to output so much information because you think the audience needs to know every little bit. They need to know the exact gun damage. They need to know the exact champion damage, or, this exact POI has these 2 subtle hiding spots. That can lead you to just talk on and on and on. For reference, if we're breaking down timelines, for League of Legends, a lot of casters generally say a point made by either a play-by-play or a color caster should be around 25 to 30 seconds long. Anything over that can be considered monologuing because you want to give appropriate space for your co-caster. Because again, you are friends, you are there to have a conversation, and a conversation cannot really occur when one person dominates the entire time. This can also lead to what feels like fighting on air for airtime. If you have casted before and you feel like you can't get a word in edgewise, that can actually lead to you monologuing yourself because you're trying to catch up with information. You want to get your ideas out there. And that leads to a battle of two people just constantly trying to talk over each other, constantly trying to talk about something in the past. And that can lead to you not focusing on the game itself. So monologuing, it can be difficult because it can also just be that the caster is just excited about a topic. And that feels the worst to say, but it does happen. I'm excited about Vigar. I can sometimes, monologue about him and his silly, lore and everything like that. We have to be conscious of how long we are talking about certain points. How to resolve monologuing? 1, a lot of practice. Number 1. That's not listed there, but just about anything like this is any of these mistakes, it's just practice not doing so. To do that as well, time yourself. What you want to do is you want to take out a phone or, a stopwatch or anything like that and literally just sit there and time yourself as you talk. How long are you talking for? How long have you gone for? Don't look at the watch, I would say, but just time yourself, talk for a point. Once you're done, click. How long did I work? Oh my gosh, that was 1.5 minutes. Probably shouldn't have done that. Go back and revise. If you feel like you can't get enough or you don't have enough time to talk about everything, you want to condense your point. This can lead to leaving certain pieces of information out, which is absolutely okay. I would say 100% of the time, there will be another moment where you can double back to that point, where you can double back to that piece of information, especially when it comes to like basic game data or basic game mechanics. There's always going to be a time to kind of hop back to that moment and be like, yeah, so this is also what happened earlier on in the game. And a callback can actually look really good for you as well, because it shows off that you were watching the entire time, not just in the moment. Monologuing can also occur between play-by-plays and color casters. This is not just a one-sided affair. Both sides can easily feel like they should have a longer piece or they have a topic they want to talk about. So do not feel like this is only one or the other. The third one is deeper understanding of the game. The more you know about a game, the easier it is to get the information out, and the less you have to word garble your information. Knowing the abilities can help a lot, being able to call those out, but also knowing how to call it a very basic term. Molly, talk about, a grenade out, a flash, a smoke, anything like that. Sometimes that helps you from not expanding too far in or, continuously talking in that way. Essentially, in monologuing, shorten everything down and hopefully give room for everyone. The second most common mistake is crutch words. You've heard me do it about 15 times so far, probably more. Absolutely, definitely. These are words and terms that casters use while you are trying to think. Just like this, just like I said. Crutch words are very obvious only when you've repeated them. But it happens a lot more than we think, and it can happen without us consciously worrying about it. One of the lines that you will hear a lot is time and time again. Look back through any casting reel, any cast, or anything like that. I guarantee you there is a time someone has said time and time again. It is a popular phrase in casting because it's our easiest way to refer to something happening repeatedly. It's just so easy. Time and time again. Time and time again. But the more you say it, the more glaring it becomes. And we don't want to do that. These aren't just related to singular crutch words, but also to phrases. There are times where someone will say, whole deck of cards, or, something along the lines of, this team needs to step it up. It's not just relegated to a word association. It can be to an entire phrase that can be said. I'm not saying this is something like you're calling out 1K, 2K, an ace, a flawless, or a clutch, or anything like that. These are actively repeated phrases that you could swap out with other terms. And that's why it varies from person to person, especially if you work with someone across the world. For instance, you work with someone from EU, they will have different crutch phrases and pauses and different filler words that they like to use. Identifying these phrases and identifying these words that are overused and being able to fix them can help a lot for making you seem more in tune and a lot more professional on the air. Some of the ways to fix this: expand your vocabulary. Look up synonyms. 100%, that's the easiest way to do it. Second, if you're a fast talker, I talk fast. zLion can attest to this. I talk very fast, and it's bad at points. Slow down your speech cadence. Slow it down a little bit. Give yourself time to talk. Don't try speaking just to fill. Don't rush in as quickly. If you can think about the words a little bit more, even just half a second to a second, you give yourself enough time to maybe find a different phrase or a different word to showcase this moment. Lastly, practice speaking naturally. You'd actually be surprised. Playing the game does not equate to speaking naturally about the game. How often have you said orbital strike in a daily conversation? How often have you said they're rounding B on a daily basis, or side of box? Learning how to speak in a natural cadence with all of these words, with all these phrases, and with all the in-game mechanics ensures that you expand the vocabulary a little bit further. But just like when I was saying, if you slow down your cadence, you think more. You don't have to think as hard about what you're saying anymore. You start to take away some of that brain work, meaning you can focus on the more important factors. It seems kind of counterintuitive, but if you get in the rhythm of just talking naturally about the game itself, those words start to flow a little bit faster, and you can actually start, instead of thinking about what are the words I'm saying, you start thinking about what information am I outputting? Am I putting it out in a proper fashion? And that's how your mind can be shifted into taking away these crutch words that you may or may not have been relying on for a majority share of your broadcasting career. I believe there is just one more major casting mistake that I usually see, which goes hand in hand with monologuing of a sort. Running over your co-caster. So, whenever you're working with a new caster or anything like that, there are some words that are exchanged which normally equate to, if you're the play-by-play, you should always be talking about the hype moments. That's fair. I get that. As a color caster, though, it feels bad. Just like in normal everyday conversation, nobody likes being interrupted. I have not met a single person that actively enjoys being shut down in a conversation and being told, shut up, I'm talking now. I don't think anyone enjoys that. Running over your co-caster can feel very rude, and even if it's necessary, even if you're a color caster, even if you've been talking too much and you go back and yeah, they need to cut me off, I was monologuing or anything like that, it doesn't matter to the audience. At the end of the day, the audience just knows you got told to sit down, essentially. Because of that, I follow the rule of you should never interrupt your co-caster. It can create a little bit of animosity on a stage. So instead, what you want to do is you want to be able to communicate off air with them. That's number one. Most running over your co-caster will occur because you sit there going, hey, I'm trying to output information, and maybe you want to hop in with some other gleaning information. You want to get in on the conversation. Or the other side is, actually, you're wrong. That's another very big one. Just trying to point it out, which normally occurs with a color caster. They will have information that a play-by-play does not actively have. So correcting the information right away is very important. I get that. However, once again, running over your co-caster can be very, very painful in terms of how the flow of the conversation and the broadcast feels. This can also look very different depending if you're in an in-person or online event. Like right now, we're online. You don't have the affordability of being able to actually see your co-caster right beside you. You don't have the ability to like lean over, tap them on the shoulder and say, and like have hand motions. If you're in person, you actually do have that luxury. So running over your co-caster is not that big a deal most of the time. In person, I can actively, while we're casting a game, I can lean over, tap him on the shoulder, or write him a note saying, stop talking so long. I can actively tell him during a broadcast, stop talking so long. You're monologuing or you're butting in. I need space to talk. In an online environment, it's a little bit harder. So for me, as a caster in an online environment, I will almost always say during a live broadcast, do not run your co-caster over. Let them trail off on their own and learn to pick up after them. And then during the breaks, in between each match, while you're in intermission, you talk with your co-caster. You say, hey, I feel you're running me over. I feel like you're not giving me enough space. I feel like you're pointing out and being judgmental to me on desk. Or even something as simple as, I don't think your analysis on that was right. I think there was another option. Commuting with your co-caster doesn't just happen on the live air. It happens off air as well. And you shouldn't be afraid to talk to your co-caster and get nitty gritty. If something's wrong, you need to correct it. And critiquing your co-caster as well, especially someone that you plan to duo with for a long time, you need to be able to do it, but in a private setting. I've had 2 to 3 hour long conversations with my co-casters before where we are literally just VOD reviewing, going like, no, I think you're wrong. Or he thinks I'm wrong in another scenario, and we go over that. Running over your co-caster is just something that you have to talk to each other about and be able to work together on to build up further repertoire. So those are 3 of the most common mistakes. Monologuing. I already forgot. This is why I was talking about 5 minutes is I'm very bad about that. Running over your co-caster, monologuing, as well as crutch words. All of these are the most common mistakes for beginner casters. With that being said, let's talk about some of the fun advanced tips and tricks that I have picked up over the time, as a lot of this information has already been kind of discussed, of course, but some of the other things that I've also noticed and some of the things that I want to pass on to you if you are learning or wanting to get into the game, there are a few things to think about. Number 1, breaking up monotonous speech. If you've ever taken a speech class, you know it can be very difficult to not fall asleep during a talk. That's our whole job. How do we make sure people don't fall asleep? And one of the things that I've learned is sentence length. In breaking monotonous speech, you want to vary the length of each of your talking points. If you've ever read books as well, this is known as sentence breaking, where you notice each line is of a different number of words. This helps break up the audience's mind of getting used to something. You want to ensure they don't get used to your voice cadence too easily. You want to always keep them engaged. This can be done by varying your length of speaking. For me, I like to vary between 5 seconds, 10 seconds, and 15 seconds, and then the usual 30. And I'll change it up every time. I'll make sure, like, one point I'm monologuing a little bit or talking about a subject for about 30 seconds, and then when it's my turn again, I'll do a 5-second quick little burst, and I'll pass it right back to my co-caster. It creates this variable of a more almost dance on the air, which it might not be noticeable again to the audience consciously, or they might, you never know, but unconsciously they're listening in, they're still feeling it out, and they get a good vibe on it. This is also done between points and questions. as a play-by-play, you might fall into the lull of always wanting to ask a question to your co-caster. Well, change it up. Lead in with a regular point and let your co-caster infer from you. Same thing with your color casting. If you're a color caster, lay a question onto your play-by-play sometimes. See what they think about a match. That type of variation can break up a monotonous speech pattern where you have been saying the same thing. It just sounds the same all the way through. So that's a little tip for on-air changing things. Another thing that I've learned about on-air, especially for new casters, and this applies to going back to the monologuing or the general discussion of how we want to bring information to the table. When we're talking about the game, I've learned that for casters, you will fall into one of three categories, or levels in this case. In level 1 of casting, we don't bring enough information to the table. Now that might seem silly. That might seem super silly, just reading that. However, in level 1, there's a time where we are not presenting enough information to garner a good idea or a good story or narrative about a broadcast. Generally, this is a very shallow analysis. You'll hear people say, and the players are moving in a really good way. They look like they have control of the map. Yeah, we can see that. What does that mean? Well, I don't know. Too little information. There's just nothing else to go on. You're not bringing a whole lot to the table, and you're not really breaking anything down. So that's step 1. Once you progress there with too little information, and you supplement that with in-game knowledge, player data, learning the game a bit more, you get to level 2, which is the overabundance of information, which is what we talked about before, which is the monologuing or running over your co-caster, which you are just espousing too much information. You're talking about every little detail. The wall from Viper, or the Sage walls going up, and then this teleporter being placed at this exact location, the lineup, talking about a Sova lineup, has to look at this particular cloud. At that point, almost you gone 45 seconds, and it's way too long. Too much information means that you have the right idea, but you're putting too much out there. And it's just convoluting the broadcast. You're losing the point in there. Level 3 is what you look at some of the top broadcasters out there, or in general, what you want to reach for, which is just right. With this, you have the information in the back of your head, but you digest it out to a level that is easy to understand for everyone, or to the audience themselves. Quick and concise. One of the favorites is like a default push, or you're talking about an A-side slant and being able to rotate in appropriate, a slow rotate as well, or it's a fast push into sight utilizing certain maybe duelists, say as in Valorant or in CSGO, smoking off choke point, for catwalk, the callouts and all, and making sure people understand that. For League, it'd be setting up a Baron fight. How do they set up for Baron fight? A warding pattern in the backside of Baron Brush on red side versus the whole push with dark coverage or no coverage for the other team. Learning to condense down the information is appropriate for breaking through these 3 different levels, providing information to the audience. In the same vein, though, I'd like to also add that a good way to think about if you're outputting the right information is, if you are casting, would you be able to, do you think your cast could be understandable by both a veteran of the game and a brand new player to the game? For me, that's my goal. Every time I cast, the one thing that I'm thinking about is I may have a mother of a student tuning into a match. That mother has no idea about the game outside of the fact that her son is playing in this match. and it's an important match. How do I make it entertaining for her just as much as it's entertaining to the coach watching this broadcast back? To me, that will help me decide what information I want to put out there and how easily I want to make it digestible. In doing that, it leads into the third fact, learning the lingo. I'm sure y'all have played different games, and many of them are somewhat the same to an extent. But this will also be very prevalent if you want to be a multi-game caster. For you, if you want to cast both Valorant, League of Legends, and multiple other titles, like Rocket League or any of the FPS genres or any of the other up-and-coming games, you'll recognize that a lot of the game mechanics are about the same thing. A lot of them are just like, you move in, you fight, round over, good. Or you shoot things, you kill things, you're done, you're good. What's the main difference is the lingo of each game. If you're going to be a multi-game caster, you need to sound like you know what you're talking about at all points. And to do that, you have to sound very comfortable with the words themselves. Calling Valorant agents champions will get you crucified. Calling Apex Legends characters, fighters will probably get you, crucified as well. They're legends. They're champions. They're heroes. They're agents. For FGC, they're characters. Learn the lingo, even if they all sound the same, and it will make things 10 times easier. Instead of bomb, call it a spike. Instead of CT spawn, call it defender spawn. Granted, that's interchangeable. In some audiences, of course, in Valorant, it's called CT spawn, even though it's called defender spawn. Things like that, learn the lingo of the game that you are casting. If you are a multi-game caster, utilizing this fact will make you seem much more presentable. And I say that with all the love in my heart as someone that has cast multiple titles. It's not to say that you don't know what you're talking about, but as soon as you say you are a variety caster, many producers or groups will automatically look down on you because they think you have not put in the same amount of time and you are not as skilled as other casters that are specifically casting one title. And that's why we want to break that. If you are a variety caster, if you're hoping to be a variety caster, you want to be able to break out of that mold. So learning the lingo helps a lot. Finally, protect your moneymaker. Normally, this would be in regards to your face. Keep your face all pretty and fresh. That's about 50% of it. Most of it, though, is going to be protecting your moneymaker, which is your throat, your voice. It is very, very important. So this is something to those that also are getting into long hours. If you're starting to cast a lot and you're not used to it, if you don't have any vocal training, there's a few things that I do like to say that you could do. Number one, keep your voice fresh before and after a broadcast. One of the things, drink a lot of water throughout the day. Definitely try and drink, regularly an amount of water. And then after broadcasts, I generally say like green tea and honey is a great way to take care of your voice. And then also a salt water gargle will help. All of these are different treatment options for, a sore throat or anything like that. And it helps keep your vocal cords fresh, especially if you have a day job that you talk a lot, or you're like me, I cast almost every single day. So I have to keep my voice fresh. I need to be able to have my voice sound somewhat okay every single time I step on air, whether I cast 3 hours last night or 7 hours last night. It doesn't matter. I need my voice good to go. There are some other techniques that some people have, which are like, I want to say overseas products that people take to get their voice fresh every single time, which I'm not even going to mention those because those are like $200, $300 and none of you should be looking into that. Don't worry about that. Tea, honey, water, salt water gargle. What I'll do is after a broadcast, salt water gargle for, 4 or 5 rinses, and then hot tea and honey. And then after that, water again. That's my night routine every single time. Before a broadcast, you can also do warm-up exercises. You don't want to go 0 to 100 ever during broadcast. That will ruin your voice faster than anything. Warm-up exercises are very important. You can go look up vocal exercises for singers. That's really good to do. These usually involve like tongue twisters or just vocal range exercises, warming up your vocal cords. Or if you're not singing or if you're not casting on the day, I like to sing songs. I have a playlist of about 7 songs that each have varying pace. I think I have like Eminem on one of them. I have a bunch of like metal bands. I have K-pop as well. A variety of songs that I sing along to make sure to keep my voice fresh in a tone and strengthen the vocal cords as well. So protecting your moneymaker, protect your voice at all costs is very, very important. It's also another thing to say, especially around this season. Make sure to take care of the weather. If you're feeling sick, it's important that you take care of yourself. Don't let things get worse, because you never want to be in a position where you have a couple gigs coming up and you have to give them a call and say, hey, I can't do it because I got sick. It's the worst feeling in the world. It's terrible to do, and it makes like me want to cry half the time. I've done it 2 or 3 times. It's awful. So again, protect the moneymaker, the thing that is making you, if you are making money or getting gigs, the whole reason you're here at the end of the day. With that being said, that is the end. I know I talked a lot. I do apologize. I think that was like an hour total. Jesus, you guys actually sat here and listened. I feel so bad for y'all. Cool. Any questions anyone has? This has been kind of the intro to casting a course, but any questions that you guys have, anything that you want to ask about, or just want to like pick my brain, say, hey, you're wrong, anything like that?
I've got a
Hi.
question, if it's not too big. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, I'll go next.
Okay, sorry for interrupting you.
And before you ask a question, do you mind? As we said, we are recording. Do you mind stating your username first?
I do not mind. My name is Natural. I was gonna say, I feel like, at least in my experience, when I started casting, it was very easy to lose my voice. It happened very often, but there was a period of time where I casted every day, and I feel like after a week of that, it kind of became like a non-factor. Like I didn't really have to take care of my voice that much to not lose it. Is that something that you've experienced as well, or is that maybe that depends on the person? I don't know.
That's actually a really good question, because that actually goes back to strengthening your vocal cords with like warm-up exercises and things like that. If you don't mind me asking, how old are you?
Now I'm 24, but when I started casting, I was 20, 21.
Hey, very nice, very nice. So I would say when you're younger, it is much easier to gain that resistance and to gain that ability to cast for long periods of time. The energy levels and everything like that, it helps a lot. So I would actually say that yes, I have had that same level of ability to be able to cast for long periods of time and to be able to keep my voice going all the time.
Mm-hmm.
The only reason I do say to keep your voice fresh is actually, even though I know I can cast, I've noticed that the level of ability to cast and my level to hit certain octaves would change on a daily basis. So even though I know I can output a broadcast at a certain, like I can output at I want to say my base level of ability, my ability to hit the high notes, my ability to keep pace, my ability to not sound like I'm scratching the back of my throat at the end of the day, there were slight variations that maybe an inexperienced audience wouldn't notice, but some of my co-casters would notice. They would say, hey, you had a rough day yesterday. And I'm like, really? And they're like, yeah, your voice sounds really rough. I'm like, well, shit, that's not good. Because even though I want to cast a lot, I need to make sure I can put out, I don't want to say a perfect broadcast every time, but a somewhat even broadcast every single time or above that level. I want a good baseline, and if my voice fluctuates too much, it doesn't set a good precedent, because one day I could be really good, and then the next day I could be really bad or a little bit lower quality than I would like, and I could actually lose out on potential future work. So 100%, if you do cast every day, you will build up a tolerance, 100%. And that's great, actually. Build up the tolerance. That's what we want. That's actually why I say if you are not casting on the day, make sure to do some sort of vocal stimulation, right?
Mhm.
But you want to do a little bit more on top of that. But 100%, if you cast for like a week, 2 weeks straight, almost every day, you will build up a good tolerance, and I felt that as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I think Na was the next one, correct?
Yeah, my name's Na. Bit more of a fluff question, but I've never done variety myself. I've only ever done League.
Oh.
And the way that you talked about it was actually pretty interesting. So I wanted to know what has been your favorite game to cast, and been your experience doing variety? Has it been enjoyable?
Oh. So you're asking what my favorite game to cast out of all the titles that I've cast, and then is it enjoyable to do variety casting?
Yeah, well, I meant it more as in, if it was possible for you to do only one game, would you do that, or have you grown a liking
Oh.
to variety itself?
Uh okay, that's actually pretty good considering it is variety, huh? So I will say my favorite game to always cast will always go back to League of Legends. League of Legends has been my pride and joy for ages. I started back in So I actually started out in CS Source, playing CS Source back in the day, like all the way back 2010, 2011, when I was allowed to actually play video games. And I started playing in like season 3 of League, and I fell in love. So from 2013 all the way till now, across an 11-year streak, um, as much as there are other fun games, as much action that can occur across other games, I don't think there has been another game that has provided the raw buildup of energy so blatantly on a screen and allowed me to empower my voice on top of that as well. The When I talk about flow, as I said, it's specifically on League. League feels amazing when you hit the high points, and when the game itself is like a concert in your hands. It's fantastic watching it all go right. Um, it's essentially a culmination of like 30 seconds to like a minute of prep before to like a 20-second fight, and it is glorious. So in my opinion, League of Legends will always be my favorite game. To say would I do it exclusively? Absolutely not. I am way too. I don't want to say neurodivergent. I don't want to say that or anything like that because I don't know enough about that. What I do know is my brain bounces a little bit too much, and if I cast League 7 days out of the week, I am going to go bonkers. I need variety in my life. I need the different pacing of, say, Valorant, ups and downs. I need to cast like SSBU or Tekken 6 or these fast-paced action games. Or even the super slow pace. Even go to chess where I don't have to get super excited. I literally just talk about strategies for 10, 15 minutes. For me, variety is a spice of life, and I will always stand by that. And also I like on my little resume, if we're talking about fluff, I love the fact that I can flex over anyone and say I've literally cast over 30 titles across multiple different scenes, and I've done it well. So I appreciate the fluff question. I appreciate it.
Thank you, thank you.
Anybody else have any questions? Going once, going twice.
I do actually.
Oh, go for it.
Sorry, I'm back.
Okay.
Yeah, I talked to Cubby. I think it was like 2 years ago. He was doing like coaching for casting, more or less.
Yeah.
It was an interesting time, and I really appreciated his time as well. He has like some opinions on casting that I wanted to know what you thought about.
Absolutely.
He sees casting very much like closer to journalism rather than anything, in a sense where kind of the personality of the caster should be muted. And I was kind of wondering what you thought about that.
So yes and no, actually, and you actually bring up a really good point. I love the fact that you've been casting for about 4 years because it does bring a different insight into this, right? And the fact that you actually spoke with Cubby, who is someone I highly respect as well. I've worked with him in the past, and he is awesome.
Yeah, he's great.
His information gathering, he is what I lovingly referred to as the dad of League of Legends. If you ever work with him, if you ever hear him, he's literally just chill as fuck. I'm going to glaze the fuck out of him for that for a little bit. Excuse my language. To the point of journalism, I would say no. Do I believe that the casters should be muted? Yes. But there's a lot of nuances to that. And there's a lot of different priorities, and which is why I had the disclaimer all the way at the beginning. These are my opinions and my opinions only on a lot of this, and it is very important to dig. I believe, first and foremost, that we are entertainers. And we need to be entertainers to a large majority mass of players, to parents, to people of multiple walks of life. In esports, it's, I feel, one of the weirdest worlds because you get not just the avid watchers, such as if you're watching football. I mean, at this point, if you're watching football, you're a football fan, right? Like that's what you do. You're primarily catering to a football audience. Same with like soccer and stuff like that. In esports, it's a higher chance that you're gonna have a world of difference. And you're gonna have just people from all over the place. You know, someone tuning in like, oh, what the hell is this? To the kid that's literally played it since he was born. To that effect, to say we should only be more like journalism and the casters should be more muted, I would agree, because on the forefront, the players, the game itself should be your highlight. They should be front and center. They should be the ones that we always espouse that we should always be talking about, and we should always be highlighting. So to that extent, yes, casters should be muted. To the point of journalism, though, journalism to me is writing about the history, and it's very just stock standard.
Right. No, I'm paraphrasing what he said because he
Okay.
wasn't like saying explicitly that it was journalism, but to me that's kind of how it felt, where he was like, "You're." Yeah, sorry to interrupt you, but I'm
No, that's
just saying
100%.
that I was paraphrasing. Yeah.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, because that does change, you know, how we talk about this, right? In terms of being muted, yes, I would agree that we need to kind of take a back seat, but at the same time, you also have to recognize that more often than not, you're going to be representing not yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think dulling your individual self a little bit is appropriate. Because when I go on air with, say, CIE, I'm not going there as Orbital the individual. I'm going there as Orbital the representative of CIE to an audience of maybe 100 to 200 to 300 or however many we have on stream. Or in future, you know, say this is being brought to a company, you know, I am not myself. I am not my own individual self. I represent someone else. So in that essence, I would say we mute ourselves to an extent, but we do need to be entertaining towards those watching this company. We can bring our own individual unique talents out, or our own unique personalities, if it is also in assistance of uplifting the broadcast as a whole. To that extent, there are some broadcasts where it definitely feels like the caster is literally just casting and trying to make themselves look big on air, when that's not what we want to do. We want, as casters, to be that megaphone that opens up the door for for the players that are actively playing in front of us.
Okay. Thanks for the insight.
Yeah. Anyone else? zLion, you still there?
Yeah, I'm still there. I think on that note, there's no many questions. I'd just like to thank, first and foremost, Orbital for being here to talk about, you know, casting and, you know, helping us get a better understanding of what casting really is. And yeah, and once again, guys, this will be recorded and posted on YouTube, and I will link you guys. And yeah, thank you so much for everyone for coming, and thank you again, Orbital. I really appreciate you doing this.
Yeah, and I look forward to possibly doing it more in the future, because
Yeah, of course.
discussions are always fun. By the way, love being able to sit down and discuss this stuff.
A hundo P.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's basically it. Yeah, thanks again everybody for coming, and I think that's pretty much it for the workshop. And I will talk to you guys later. I also have to run right now, but
Oh
I'll
no,
talk
I'm
to
so sorry.
everyone later. No, you're okay. You're good. I gotta go, but I'll talk to everyone later. And of course, feel free to reach out to me if you guys have any more questions. But yeah, I'll just run first. If anyone else has any questions for Orbital, then I will leave you guys to it. Then, all right. Have a lovely day, guys. Bye bye.
Yeah, bye.
Thanks, Orbital.
Of course, of course. Anyone else have any questions? If not, then we can basically just kind of check out here.
I
Yeah.
guess just to close off,
Of course.
you mentioned earlier, like during sort of pre-broadcasts, doing stuff to like, if you're with a new duo who you haven't cast with before,
Mm-hmm.
like are they trying to find that the rhythm and stuff? But I've sort of found that it's like a just sort of like within a short span of time, that you have, you know, in the like, between sound check and so on and all the stuff that you do before going on air. I don't know. Do you have like specific things that you tend to like go to get used to, or to like sort of get your toes in the water with a new duo?
With a new duo, actually, so there's a few things I specifically do. Number one, I set a certain precedence down. So with new casters, it's very important to establish, what their ideals of for casting are. Because again, everyone comes into this a little bit differently, and everyone comes into it with a different idea of what casting is. And this is actually very prevalent across different titles. Some people believe in Valorant it should be, done a certain way, and then someone could have a vastly different idea of how they want to cast. So setting out those expectations first, I generally like to ask, what do you like to talk about? Do you like to talk about rotations? Are you more analytical? Are you more generalized? Do you like to just kind of riff? Do you like to have fun? I ask about what they like to do on air a lot of the time. If I get the chance, I like to also ask a little bit more important, such as, is there anything you're uncomfortable with? Any jokes that you don't like being made? Is there anything that you are uncomfortable speaking about, or something that you're not so knowledgeable about on the air? These are also questions that I like to use. And then third is actually just generally about them. I will actually, during the 30-minute pre-show, I will actually just joke around with everyone in the room. I will set myself as a very outgoing, jokey person and see how they react. Not trying to like prod their buttons or anything, but are they a more joking personality? Are they more extroverted to an extent? Do they naturally mesh with me, or do I need to bring my energy down? Do I need to cut back on the jokes a bit more? Are they more soft-spoken? Should I lower my tone of voice to match theirs as well? These are also very specific to me, but generally you can ask them, what do you like to talk about? What do you prefer to talk about? Is there anything that you don't like? And I also set forward the role allotment. Are you play-by-play? Are you color? What do you think play-by-play and color means? And that way I have a good idea of what their thoughts of the cast will be going into it.
Oh, that makes sense. That's quite helpful. Thanks.
Yeah. I will also say, even if you're casting with someone new, there's a 90% chance that you're not going to get that much out of the pre-show. There's only so much you can get. And then, like, a good chunk of it actually comes from casting the first game with them and just literally fixing things on the fly. So only so much you can prepare for.
Yeah, that's true.
All right. Anything else?
I have
I think
a-
I'm me. I don't think so. I'll go for it.
Yeah.
I have a scenario for your orbital.
A what?
This
Sorry.
has happened. A scenario.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so because this has happened to me before, and you were mentioning how, if like as a caster you shouldn't really talk over your co-caster ever.
Mm-hmm.
Which I do agree with to some extent. But say you're casting with someone who's more or less completely new, right?
Yep.
You're on play-by-play. They're on color.
Yes.
A fight breaks out in the river. It's a banger of a fight. But your co-caster is going on about itemization for no reason whatsoever. What do you do?
Okay. So I'm gonna say what other people say that should happen. And honestly, there are times without, like, even though I say you shouldn't, I will say there are times like that where it would, even though I say you shouldn't, I wouldn't fault you if you did, right?
Okay. Because I totally would.
Yes, yes,
I 100% would.
yes. I have actually run into that more times than I can count.
Yeah.
So a lot of my broadcasts come in the T4 scene. These are orgs that are literally just like, hey, do you want to cast? I'm like, I got nothing going on that day, sure. And I'm
Yeah.
slapped with someone that's very, very fresh, very new. I've run into that a lot, and honestly, I've realized, I want to say to like 60 to 70% of them, they actually know they ran over
Mhm.
the team fight, and they're actually really embarrassed about it.
Mhm.
Or they at least understand that they messed up, and kind of pointing that out and forcing my way in would actually be difficult. Because it'd probably make them feel a little bit worse. And then I've actually noticed if I try and push into them, they actually mute then at almost every single fight afterwards, even a small fight.
Mm.
And that hinders their judgment on what's going to happen next. And so, like, if it's like an obvious read where they don't have a team fight coming up, but they still stop because it's like, oh, there's some action going to occur. That's not really what I want. So, to me, I let them ramble. Honestly, it's also fun because I get a break, right? But I will let them ramble most of the time, and then I'll actually, during intermission, I will always call it out. I'll almost
Okay.
always call it out in intermission.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
No, I have had that experience as well before.
It
but
is-
yeah, most of the time
Yep.
I was doing kind of the opposite tech where if there was a fight happening, no matter what, I was kind of interrupting. If it
Yep.
was an important fight. If it wasn't important, then I would just kind of let it have its course.
100%.
But yeah, I guess maybe I'll try your tech next time. Maybe that can work as well.
Oh,
There was only one time
Mm-hmm.
where, like, I was casting with this one person, and I think they got defensive.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so instead, it actually had the opposite effect, where instead of me being able to like cast the team fights, they would go even harder. They would speak over me, and now we were competing over team fights, and I was like, okay,
Yes.
whatever. I guess I'm color casting now, and it was just,
Yep.
it was very awkward. I don't know if that's ever happened to you, but
It has as well.
okay.
So the reason I opened this up as kind of the floor for it first was, as casters, we should always be open to working with each other. Does that happen
Yeah.
all the time? No. That's also why I tried to preface it with, if we're on air, I will never try and like cause, butting of the heads, because as soon as you do, like, everyone knows it. Not a
Yeah.
fault on you though. Like, there was no way you could have known that would happen, right?
Yeah.
Like, you're just trying to fix an error that you see, and it sucks that they did that to you. It's happened to me as well. Like, you try and talk to them, and they're like, "No, you're wrong." And they're like, "Okay, well, I'm not doing that again. Sorry." It's
Pretty
just
much.
like, well, that sucks. I'm sorry, but most often I've found that just, running people over just doesn't feel good. And granted, I've also, if it becomes really bad, I've also done DMs in the middle. Like, again, in online, there's no way to like tap someone on the shoulder, right? But
Mhm.
I know some people, I've had it happen to me, is someone will DM me and be like, "Hey, you're talking like 5 seconds too long. Can you cut it short?" Right?
Mhm.
If you have that type of camaraderie, you can absolutely do that with them. And if not, then take your chance at the intermission and pray to God that they don't get mad at you. So I absolutely get you on that, man.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I'm just curious if that was like a shared experience or not. Okay.
It
Uh,
absolutely is. It's too real of an experience, man.
I'm surprised because like you would think that it's not like I'm forcing them to like color cast. If they wanted to play by play cast, I would let them. But like they would be like, no, I want to color cast, and then they're talking over team fights. And I'm like, well, man, you've got to make a choice. Like,
Yep,
I
100%.
was actually gonna say, like, I've sort of noticed there's some caster duos that like tend to keep the play by play and the color like very sort of delineated, I guess, in their roles. But then there's some duos I've seen, and some of them like do this very well, where they sort of blend the roles together a little bit. Where like one of them will
Yes.
be play by play, the other will be color. But then sometimes you'll have the color. If things work out this way, the color will sort of take over play by play for a fight, and they'll sort of um the roles are sort of more like loose, sort of
More fluid, more dynamic in that
yeah,
factor.
more fluid.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, I don't know, I've heard some people say, you know, they think the one is sort of, you know, better or worse than the other, and that like the latter approach can be confusing, or I don't know. Do you have thoughts on it?
Of course. Do you mind telling me which games you are interested in?
I'm mostly Overwatch.
So that's why, actually.
Is
Um,
it?
yeah. So this is something that I kind of mentioned. This is why I also said the flow and the read of a game is vastly different from title to title. When it comes down to that style of is play by play and color much more structured versus is it more fluid, it actually comes down to which title you're casting. So I would normally say in MOBAs, the structure for play by play and color is pretty much hard in stone. And the reason for that is the pace of the game for League is vastly slower than like an FPS title, right? You take a look at League and it's like it takes a minute and a half for things to ramp up in some scenarios. For a Baron fight, you could see that if you've casted a lot, you can see it like 2 or 3 minutes out. You already see a team prepping, you know, they get the wards and everything like that. And then you take a look at a game like Overwatch, where an entire rotation happens within like 30 to 35 seconds. And it can also be very difficult to tell when a fight's breaking out, and the action that occurs is much more variable. So in essence, in Overwatch, you actually have to actively have hybrid, because if something breaks out, if your co-caster, in the sense that there are two roles, if your color caster is not used to dropping at the drop of a hat, you're actually going to fall behind the pacing of the game.
Yeah.
So your question is actually 100% correct in there, in that different titles need different things. So the question that was posed, I'm sorry, I think I went off track, was the fact that you were asking, is one way better than the other? And I say no. So when you get to a certain level, it stops becoming a question of how good are your fundamentals, and it starts becoming how well do you mesh with your duo. And in that sense, the casting vibe between you two will differ immensely from others, and that's actually what makes some duos so unique. I will say for League, I love hard rolls. I love hard rolls, and it's basically for any MOBA out there. Any MOBA, I do not want hybrid. There is no reason for hybrid, because everything that happens in the game is so clear cut that your role should be clear cut as well, right? In Overwatch, I think I've been casting Deadlock as well. In Deadlock, in FGC, I want hybrid all day long. I do want that fluidity of, yeah, we have a role, but if things occur, we can swap at the drop of a hat and it won't feel awkward, right? In Valorant, I know it depends on the duo that I work with. I've done both hard locked roles in Valorant and CSGO. I've done hard locked roles of play-by-play and color, and I have done hybrid as well because of how often certain fights can break out and when fights don't break out. So unfortunately, the answer to that is it depends on the game, the title, and your co-casters that you bring to the table. But whatever you choose, you need to make it as comfortable as you can. Don't try and force hybrid. Don't try and force roles. Whatever works for you two needs to be what you practice for.
All right. Well, that makes sense.
Yeah. It's a very fluff answer as well, which I apologize for.